Hi, Cecilia. Welcome.
Hi, thank you.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Jeannie Long, Executive Director at Chicago Collections Consortium and part of the advisory committee of the Chicago Research Summit. I have the pleasure today of welcoming you to today's session, Integrating Studio, Seminar, and Exploration in Chicago-based courses. Just to let you know and remind you, today's session is being recorded, and we hope to have these recordings available to you post-conference. Let's begin with introductions of our panelists.
Hi, everybody. My name is Luke Joyner, and I am a lecturer at University of Chicago teaching studio, seminar, and exploration hybrid courses. I've been doing this for about 4 or 5 years. We are really lucky to be joined by a wide range of people who represent different aspects of this collaboration. We have 3 alums of these courses and of the University of Chicago here. Do you want to introduce yourselves real quick? Cecilia?
Yeah, my name is Cecilia. I took courses with Luke while doing my undergrad at the University of Chicago, and I graduated in 2018, and I'm currently a PhD student at Columbia University.
Casey?
Hi, everyone. I'm Casey. I also was a student of Luke's at the University of Chicago. I graduated in 2020, and I'm now pursuing a Master of Landscape Architecture at City College of New York.
Sam?
Hi, everyone. My name is Sam. I just graduated this past spring. My major was environmental and urban studies with minors in architectural studies and visual arts. And I'm now thinking about applying to grad schools.
And then we also have several colleagues and collaborators at the University of Chicago. Nutan?
Hi, everybody. My name is Nutan Barani. I am a lecturer with the Department of Art History at University of Chicago, and I'm also the Associate Director of Design at Arts and Public Life.
Bridget?
Hi, everyone. I'm Bridget Madden. I'm at the Visual Resources Center in the Department of Art History.
Neil?
Hi, everyone. My name is Neil Atkinson, and I am an architectural historian of the Italian Renaissance, and I'm also chair of the Department of Art History at the University of Chicago.
So we're really lucky that we have such a widely comprised panel to hopefully give you a sense of some of what we've been doing these last 4 or 5 years. I'm going to start out and talk a little bit briefly just to kind of set the scene of what it is we're talking about today and some of the things that we've been trying to do over the last 4 or 5 years. Then we're going to turn it over to our 3 alums to talk about their experience in these courses and how that's kind of informed their relationship to the built environment and their current work as they've graduated and gone on to kind of figuring out what's next in their lives. Then we'll have some reflections briefly from Nutan, who is a colleague of mine who teaches another one of these classes, and Bridget, who is the director of the Visual Resources Center, which is a really crucial collaborator that we rely on heavily to be able to do this work. And then from Neil, who chairs the department these classes are fit within, and is also an architectural historian who thinks a lot about the navigation of cities and the ways that we can use exploration to potentially enhance our research about cities. So we'll try to do that in the first 30 minutes as best as possible. And then in the second 30 minutes, leave time for some conversation first amongst us, and then amongst all of us, including all of you. So who are we and what are we here to talk about? Well, I think the first thing to say is that the University of Chicago is a particularly rich and full environment when it comes to thinking about the city of Chicago. We have lots of different departments in the humanities and the social sciences, also in some cases in other, further afield departments such as physics that are interested in the city and that spend a lot of time thinking about cities and this city. We also have centers and institutes and programs like the Mansueto Institute for Urban Innovation, which does a lot of high-level global cities research, or something like Chicago Studies, which is actually a dedicated program to thinking about the city of Chicago, all of which we collaborate with and work together with. So it's a little bit tricky to sort of explain what we do without explaining all of this landscape, because the University of Chicago does not have an architecture school. So what we're doing here is not exactly the same as what it would mean to do a studio architecture or urban design course at an architecture school that's set up, oriented around that thing. Rather, we have a landscape of lots of people studying cities in lots of different ways, and we're trying to fit into that landscape in a way that actually meets student interest and provides something that they don't get from other ways of studying the city elsewhere at the university. In particular, what we're talking about today is studio, seminar, exploration hybrid courses that fit within our architectural studies minor within the art history department, but we work very closely with the environmental and urban studies department, with geography, with Chicago studies, and with a lot of other entities at the university. And there continue to be more and more people interested in doing urban research about Chicago in different ways at UChicago. Rebecca, who's on this call, gave a panel earlier today about the resources that the Chicago library system has been providing. And there was another panel from Cecilia Smith, who is our map librarian, who I believe talked about the ways that mapping and map resources are able to fit into Chicago research. There is a new urban theory lab under Professor Neil Brenner, who's doing a different kind of high-level urban thinking. So we're fitting into a kind of rich and varied and woven puzzle, and trying to kind of fit in not only to sort of do something a little different, but also to kind of build clarity for undergraduates and generate a kind of connection across these various different boundaries so that the research in all these places becomes more robust. So we've done things like put together resources for students that try to explain all the different places around the university that you might be able to find courses that deal with the built environment in some way. And every quarter, we put together a list of these courses, which you can see on the right here, color-coded, trying to kind of make sense of some of the courses that engage the built environment, many of which have to do with Chicago. But who are we and what are we here to talk about? Well, we are representing an attempt to pull together three primary modes of thinking and doing: studio, seminar, and exploration, into courses that meaningfully incorporate each of those modes and try to weave them together in ways that all of the aspects benefit from the synthesis. And we really benefit from this being something that came out of students' interests. So the whole reason that these courses came about was that Cecilia and a couple of her colleagues were in a class that was an architectural history class about these things that involved exploring the city, and were interested in trying to do studio work in some way. And out of that interest came a development of courses that managed to kind of build off of exploration and seminar past in the art history department, but build in a studio component and have that component be an orienting component to how students engage the city and think about the built environment in a very sort of close way. Many of the courses that we've built culminate in group and teamwork, and we've tried really, really hard to build a culture of supporting each other, and a culture that's not necessarily competitive or, aiming towards a kind of particular achievement end, but more a culture that actually investigates what's possible if you really build a team and come out into the city with that team, supporting each other, caring about each other's work, and really valuing and having a stake in the work that other students do. We are situated not by accident in the humanities. I think that there's inevitably all kinds of angles on how you can research Chicago and how you can research places that come from different modes of thinking. Being situated in the humanities gives us the possibility of integrating both close observation of the built environment with roots in art history and architectural history, and imagination with roots in things as far afield as creative writing or filmmaking or other types of media that can fit in and actually fit together based on whatever the sort of themes of the classes are. Doing this has taken tremendous time, care, and effort. This is something we could talk about a little bit more if you're interested in the questions period, but just thinking about some of the challenges that have been involved in building up studio architectural work within a school that doesn't necessarily have that, has never had that before, and doesn't have a professional architecture school to latch into, doesn't have that space, doesn't have necessarily that culture of having studio being an orienting pole. So instead, having studio to sort of dovetail between seminar and exploration is both an opportunity and a challenge to figure out how to cram that into 10 weeks without overwhelming students too much. And really just kind of build up the interest rather than pushing students away. And in our 5th year of still doing this, we're still learning. This fall, we've finally been able to institute a more open time block that we think is going to be really important for building up the student-led culture around these courses, because currently these courses don't even have a major. And so being able to bring together students in a more open-ended way has proven really successful already in 3 weeks, but we're at the very, very, very beginning of that. So really quickly, because I want to turn it over to everyone else, just some examples of some of what these courses look like. And Nutan can also provide an example of the course she teaches later. But I teach a course called Imagining Chicago's Common Buildings. It's rooted in the vernacular residential architecture of Chicago. It culminates in student projects that really rest on the seminars and reading and historical thinking we do, the exploration around the city. We have 6 field trips plus a site visit in this class. And then a lot of collaboration with a lot of different people and entities around the city and also within the university that culminates in a studio project. We have all kinds of different readings from different sources, including not only critical readings, but reading poetry from people around Chicago, reading literature from Chicago's history that help us situate in worlds both present and historical, and really kind of value the closeness to this city in all kinds of different imaginative and human ways as we're building up a connection to it. We have field trips around the city. We have studio projects that build up in scale so that by the time the students are actually thinking about sites that they choose in a neighborhood that the class has chosen, the groups that choose the sites in groups of 3 are thinking about these things and relating to these things in a way that's very tangible and hopefully very directly connected to their own everyday lives and their own everyday experience. This is Casey's site from her project group a couple of years ago in this class in East Pilsen, which has now since been filled with a building. Another example of a class is Architecture of the Public Library. I taught this last spring. Thank you, Rebecca, for your collaboration. This was a heavily collaborative class with both the UChicago library system and Chicago Public Libraries and other libraries. One of the hopes of this class was that we would have every class session in a different library, either on campus or around the city. That didn't quite happen because of the pandemic, but we got pretty close. And it was really pretty interesting to be able to actually be in the spaces as we were learning and as we were building up the studio work. The class worked through different themes, and the readings each week tried to match where students were in the various studio projects and where we were in our explorations around the city. We were able, for example, to go to the new Little Italy Library Senior Housing branch and meet with the architect of that branch in that space and the children's librarian, and be able to have a conversation with them about their different perspectives about the space and its use. Another example is a class I'm teaching right now called Children in Architecture, where we're again heavily collaborating in the first half of the course with the UChicago lab schools. My students will be building blocks, and next week they're going into the lab school to play with the blocks that they've designed and built in the preschool as their midterm. And then in the second half of the course, going in and actually working on a playground project with a school in Chicago Lawn at 63rd, roughly 63rd and Western. And that was 2 weeks ago. My students starting to get their hands dirty, helping rehab a playground near the school. And then this was 1 hour ago. This morning, I went with the 6th graders to a nature playground here in McKinley Park where I'm sitting. And we met with the playground's builder, and the kids climbed trees. We're going to have the same trip later today for the college students. So this is literally happening ongoing right now. You can see just from looking at the calendar for the course that there's a lot of different pieces, and it's important to kind of organize how they fit together and really try to dovetail them. And then there are other courses that I don't teach. Nutan will talk about architecture of memory later. There are other courses in the works. The Cities in Protest course we're really excited about is going back to 1968, thinking both present and historically about the city of Chicago in a different way. I'm going to stop there. The last thing I'll say is just that we have the luxury by not being in an architecture school program of teaching courses that are thematic, where whoever's teaching the course can really find a way for the topic of the course to orient the studio, the seminar readings and discussion, and the exploration components, and build them all in seamlessly in a way that really motivates whatever the topic of the course is. So I'll stop there and turn things over to Cecília, and then to Casey, and then to Sam to talk a little bit about their own experiences, and then also their own current work and how it's informed their views on the built environment. So Cecília, I'll turn things over to you.
Yeah, I will start talking about my experience taking Luke's first iteration of Imagine Chicago Common Buildings, Chicago's Common Buildings, which was a class that, as Luke described, emerged out of an interest from students to have more studio-based courses in architecture. So when I took the class, I was definitely interested in having a practical studio component that was allied with the kinds of research, urban and art history research that I was interested in. I was in the art history department, focusing on architectural history. And I was also really interested in this mode of observation, learning through experience, through walking and being in the city, which was a strong component and still is of the course. Kind of just learning how to read and how to notice and observe the built environment was something that I was really attracted in. So that course, I think some of the modes of observation really filtered into other work that I have done since, especially the works where I'm trying to have some kind of practice or an artistic practice in collaboration with other artists. Photos that you have here are from a project that I have run with my sister and many other collaborators called Open Sheds with Useful Watts, where we place this structure that you see on the screen now, a metal found structure in different places in the city, and invite artists, researchers, collaborators to do interventions and events there. And a lot of this project, from the selection of the place to the kinds of observations that we do after, are in a way engaging with the same mode of thinking that we did in Luke's class, where we would walk in neighborhoods and learn about these lots and just engage in this process of imagination, really kind of open up the imagination to think about what could be there. So I think that kind of ways of thinking that we exercise in that class are still very influential in the ways that I try to practice. Now I'm doing a PhD in the art history department at Columbia, also still focusing on architectural history, and I'm sure these kinds of practices are going to continue to filter in.
I would also just add that Cecília wrote a wonderful undergraduate thesis paper about River City, which I highly recommend looking at. It's a really wonderful piece of research that also sort of came out of a lot of exploration, thinking, and studio work, even in a way, because it's a kind of point of view on this sort of historical stuff. Casey, do you want to go next?
Sure. So I guess I can talk about my experience taking these courses and how they've impacted my graduate work. So I remember the first time that I met Luke before taking Common Buildings. We were just talking about my interest in exploring graduate work, potentially in architecture. And Luke, since then, has been kind of like a very valuable mentor and source of guidance for me in pursuing the the often difficult path of graduate school. But I feel like, especially looking back now through all the photos and reflecting on these courses, they've really been a boon to me navigating that kind of environment. I feel like oftentimes I felt like there's a sense of like there's always a sense, I feel like, not always, but there's often a sense in graduate work of knowing how you should think about something and feeling there's a correct way to think about something. And I feel like feeling kind of lost. I felt very lost in that at times. And I think looking back and thinking back towards these courses of exploring and reading and writing and discussing, I always go back to the idea of experience of the city and an individual experience of the city on an emotional level, and also like a collective experience of the city through exploring with other people and reading and talking. And I feel like that's been very centering in working in a graduate program. Yeah, I guess one thing that I've kind of been carrying forward in my work this year is thinking about collaboration across other disciplines, as was kind of common in reading and just talking to people of different majors in the common buildings classes. Thinking about how to take that into a more into graduate level work. So thinking about promoting lecture series with other professors and other departments in the CUNY system to kind of collaborate across disciplines with the landscape architecture program, and also people doing other relevant work. Yeah, I don't know, that's pretty much it for me.
Thanks, Casey. Sam, do you want to go next?
Sure. So, yeah, I really agree with everything Casey said, and what my small piece really, I think, builds on it. I just graduated this past spring, so I've just been removed from the whole experience. But what I found is that, and what I would always say is that these hybrid courses kind of absorb your whole life. In a way, in that I understand architecture studio courses tend to, but also I think in a different way because of their hybridity, because you're constantly reading hand in hand with what it is that you're sort of creating and thinking through, hand in hand with, the explorations you're doing. And like Casey was saying, your sort of personal and collective understandings of the city. And so it becomes this thing that you're sort of working through 24/7, on your commutes to class or work or whatever it is. You have readings and your sketches and, your explorations the past week all flowing through your head, kind of without clear defined boundaries between them. And like Casey was saying, what I find this does is it blurs those boundaries and makes work. It leads to work, especially group work, that is inevitably it's based in all of those things and those sort of very personal understandings of places. Where you're sort of bringing in sort of your personal reaction to readings, your sort of personal creativity, and then your also personal experience and identity. And so that has been, I think, super present in a lot of the projects I've done and seen in Luke's classes. But the pictures Luke is showing now, this is my thesis I just finished this last year on Chicago's back porches. And I think these are good examples. Actually, could you go back one, Luke? This is a good example, I think, of that, because this on the left is my neighbor's back porch. My project was super focused on particularity of small stories, really. So this porch is, I don't know if you can see, is the one outside my window here. This one on the right is my mom's porch. So bringing things from, my personal experience into sort of architectural work and thinking and just how we think about places, because that's how we go through our daily lives. There's no clear delineation between, what is theoretical, and what is practical. We sort of bring all of it wherever we go. And so that's been the main thing that I think, it sticks with me, and I feel like it sticks with everybody who I've known, in these circles and in these courses, for sure.
That's fantastic, Sam. Thank you. And just in case it wasn't clear to everyone, Sam's thesis included all of these amazing drawings and was also an 80-page written thesis. And I say that to say that these projects have a tendency to kind of feed into further research. And so the fact that these courses really rest upon, like Sam said, personal experience, studio work, writing, reading, thinking, and all of those things flow together, also have at times resulted in some really astonishing pieces of research that also do those things. And I think in this case, Sam's thesis about back porches in Chicago is really incredible for that it includes both the writing, and the writing itself is narratively beautiful writing. It's not just a technical paper, combined with a really heartfelt set of drawings that draw on your experience for your entire life, really, up to this point. And so it's a great example, a much better example than I could produce of the kind of culmination of all of this, of all of this stuff and all of what we're trying to do. And I think all three of you, thank you so much, because that was so fantastic and did a much better job illustrating what we're trying to do than I could myself. So now I want to turn things over, keeping the ball rolling, to Nutan, to Bridget, and to Neil, to talk a little bit about how these courses are able to sort of fit in and kind of collaborate across different entities at the university and beyond the university to open up opportunities within them. Nutan, do you want to go first?
Sure. Hi, everybody. First, real quick, I just want to say thanks to Luke for putting all of this together. Luke has an amazing way of bringing this architecture community together at the university. And as you mentioned, we can be a little scattered, so it's no small feat. And also, hello and congrats to all of the work that Casey, Sam, and Cecilia have done. I know, Cecilia, we have met, and Casey and Sam were both students of mine also in the first iteration of the Architecture of Memory course. So I really am enjoying seeing what you're all up to now. Okay, so yes, thank you for this slide, Luke. I'm Associate Director of Design and University Partnerships at Arts and Public Life. And I'm also an architect and in practice. So I bring all of these hats to the course that I've created. Now, let's see, I'll be in my 4th iteration of it this winter. So Arts and Public Life, the course is Architecture of Memory, and the whole point of the course, the final project that we have students do is we create a memorial. We study memorials throughout, and then students will make a design for a memorial about an aspect of social history of the South Side. And it's sited in Washington Park, which is an Olmsted design park just east of where Arts and Public Life is located, which is the 300 East block of Garfield Boulevard. The very first line of my syllabus is that architecture is for people. So, there right there is the direct connection to the humanities, of course. But one of the things that I really try to make clear on the very first day and then throughout is that just by being human, you're an expert about your spaces and in your spaces, and trying to dispel sort of the need for expertise to be able to speak about architecture with authority. I mean, anybody that experiences spaces in whatever way you do makes you an expert. Something that we talk a lot about at Arts and Public Life as well, with design programs that we have for youth. So Arts and Public Life works in exhibitions, programs, artist residencies, education for youth, creative entrepreneurship, performance, and cultural preservation. The Architecture of Memory course really kind of lives at the nexus, as of now, and the iteration so far lives in the nexus of exhibitions and cultural preservation. Currently, one of the main resources that I have for students that we work through is the Southside Home Movie Project archive collection. And so Southside Home Movie Project is a part of Arts and Public Life, an entity that collects, preserves, digitizes, exhibits, and researches home movies that are made by residents of Chicago's Southside neighborhood. So that's from the earliest films that the archive contains from the 1920s all the way up until very recent times. That's an archive that was founded by Jackie Stewart, our director who's actually on leave at the moment, but just an amazing collection of the history. And again, really seeing people on the South Side. And so this is kind of a link to the cultural preservation. And one of the other pieces with the exhibition, at the very first iteration of the course, one of the main central resources was an exhibition called Still Here, Torture, Resiliency, and the Art of Memorializing. This exhibition had a very, very different ethos and intensity, in that it was an exhibition very specifically about and of the awareness to the torture of more than 120 Black folks in Chicago in the 1970s through the 1990s by the Chicago Police Department under Commander John Burge. So in running the full spectrum as we can present it based in the content of what we have going on at Arts and Public Life, we are looking at the histories and the cultural preservations of that. So one of the major assignments that the students have now is to incorporate the Southside Home Movie Project archive into one of their assignments and creating a space for that. And then one last point, in the works for our next iteration, which will be in winter of 2022, I'm hoping to be able to have students in direct conversation with visiting artists that have been exhibiting work and are exhibiting work right now at Arts and Public Life. And specifically connecting even further and deeper with Washington Park, that Olmsted Park I mentioned, that artists that are having that connection and sort of being in that conversation.
Thanks, Nutan. That was wonderful. And if any of y'all are interested more in the Architecture of Memory course specifically, I definitely encourage you to reach out to Nutan, because it's a very, one of the coolest things about this is that these individual courses kind of take on personalities and lives and are able to really function as these very particular experiences of the city, which aren't the same every time you go through them, and they aren't just default studio. And so that rich description of that course, I think, gives you a sense of how deeply that can be true. Bridget, do you want to go next?
Sure, thank you so much for having me today, Luke, and everyone else. So I work at the Visual Resources Center in the Department of Art History, and we have our roots in the analog lantern and 35mm slide collections that were used in teaching and researching art history in the 20th century. What we do today is a little bit different. We maintain digital image databases for teaching and research. And in addition to that, we also have a constellation of resources that are meant to support research, scholarship, and publishing, and teaching with images and other visual resources, film clips, architectural drawings, all sorts of good visual stuff. We are a responsive center. We respond to direct needs and requests that our instructors and students have, but we also really try to anticipate future needs as well. And one of the joys of collaborating with Luke and the other architectural studio courses and the students who take those courses is because there's this studio seminar and exploration component, the VRC can kind of adapt to support these three different areas. So in terms of the seminar component, that's kind of our bread and butter traditional course support, maintaining images for precedent studies, kind of historical comparisons. Those kinds of things can go into our digital image collections database. To support studio courses, we work very closely with librarians at the Regenstein Library, including Rebecca Starkey and Nancy Spiegel, our amazing arts and architecture librarian, to collaborate with instructors and their students and help support the community of practice doing creative research. So thinking about strategies for approaching creative research projects, bringing research into your creative practice. And one area that we are working to really improve VRC support on is how to help students capture, document, and archive their the results of their explorations and their studio practice. So all of the drawings that are on 11 by 14 paper or smaller are really easy to get high quality digital copies of for your studios and your portfolios. But what about large scale work? What about work that's 3D or not quite 2D? So something we really hope to do this year is increase our support for documenting and photographing those kinds of things so that students have a portfolio, a professional portfolio of what they're working on.
That's wonderful, Bridget. And I was just going to say too that Rebecca, when it comes time to questions, if you do want to share a little bit about some of the collaborations we've done with the library system and how that's looked from your side, that would be great too. Neil, do you want to wrap things up before we move on to more open conversation?
Sure. Thanks, Luke. Thank you, everyone, for coming. And thank you, everyone, for being here and who is presenting today, too. What I'd like to reiterate is something that has come up a couple of times, and that is the way in which the study of architecture and cities at the University of Chicago here in this iteration and this studio culture was really student-driven, right? It came out of the desire of the students to really extend their academic and intellectual inquiry from writing and reading into doing and creative thinking. And I think this is a really, really important way of integrating both the body and the mind into a larger intellectual discourse that we're trying to create with these courses and with this program. Thinking and doing and then experience, I think, is a really, really important way of thinking about architectural pedagogy, architectural design. And you've heard from a couple of the instructors, Luke and Nutan, who've been really working innovatively to construct ways of doing sort of deep history into various different spaces and sites, and then teaching students how to think about them, how to visualize them, how to represent them, and how to understand them across time and space. Through the kind of what is important to me also is a kind of the issue of experience, mobility, and exploration. One of the things that I'm very interested in my own research in the Italian Renaissance are the ways in which cities can really be fully understood only through movement. And that's usually the movement of bodies through them, as much as buildings can be understood by bodies moving through them. And I think this sort of intellectual bodily nexus is really, really important, I think, in the kinds of thinking and doing courses we're developing here. One of the courses that was developed a few years ago by Amy Thomas called Understanding the Built Environment, which is part of the Architectural Studies minor, is kind of a transition course between architectural history and design. Gets students to really sort of think about how architecture has been understood in the past, using Chicago as the kind of model, teaching students how to think about architecture, how to measure architecture, how to understand space as well. And it's a course also that gets students out into the city as well. So there's the seminar part in the classroom, and then each week there are field trips to various different sites and spaces, places in Chicago to get students really sort of comfortable with trying to talk about and think about spaces that they're in together in a collaborative way. And this is really an important component that several of the presenters have also discussed today, especially our former students, and that is the collaborative aspect of learning together as a kind of building upon the work of others in your own work. And it allows us as a department of art history to open up to other parts of the university. And this is, I think, a very important component too, the ways in which these studio courses allow students to engage with other units within the university from a humanities perspective, from a design and creative perspective, in which they can engage with people working in data science, for example, or doing sociological analyses. It's a way, I think, of really expanding the ways in which architecture can be a capacious discipline within which to think about our relationships to each other and to cities in general. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Neil. That was a wonderful summary. Thank you all. That was a fantastic, just kind of like rapid tour through all this stuff. And I did want to mention that Catherine Taylor teaches that course, Understanding the Built Environment, currently, and is the director of the architectural minor. Catherine is here with us and perhaps might say things in the questions period, but had requested not to have too much more of a speaking role. So thank you, Catherine, for joining us. And then Chris Skrable is a force of nature who is the director of what's called the Chicago Studies Program at University of Chicago. And we are extremely lucky to work with him because he kind of toes the line between different, different kinds of both academic and non-academic experiences for students that engage the city of Chicago. So while Chris is not here today, we are very much in collaboration with him and all the work that he does. And if any of y'all are interested in some examples of the work he does, I highly recommend going to the Chicago Studies website and seeing all the various different opportunities, both within and outside classes that exist there. So I now wanted to just quickly be able to turn things over to any of us on the panel to ask each other questions, respond to each other, reflect briefly. We'll do this for about 5 minutes because we're about 5 minutes over, and then we'll open things up in the last 10 minutes to anyone else who would love to ask questions or have comments or anything like that. So does anyone want to start? Anyone who has kind of reflections based on what anyone else has said? Otherwise, I can start and ask a specific question. Oh, thanks, Rebecca, for putting that in the chat too. I'll ask a question then. I'm curious, Casey or Cecilia, as you've moved a little bit, sort of away from graduation, and as you moved into other experiences that engage the built environment in different ways, I'm curious if there are elements of this experience that you could potentially imagine evolving or developing based on what you've seen since, or vice versa, that there are elements of this experience that have kind of, motivated or, kind of allowed you to think differently about what you've been doing since, that don't necessarily exist in those experiences you currently have. Casey, you kind of got at this already a little bit, but I'm just curious if you have any more thoughts on that.
Cecilia, I don't know if you have anything off the top of your head. Well, I also just want to thank Sam for clarifying some of the thoughts that I had. That was helpful for me to to unpack my own experience. But I think the biggest thing for me is having had the experience of going through these classes, it's easier for me to recognize when things outside of them are resonating. So thinking about these classes as a way of really, or just being based upon caring deeply for a place and really sharing that value among the class. And I think the collaborative work is such a big part of that, as opposed to a kind of competitive environment. I think having had that experience, it's easier for me to recognize on a kind of emotional level when that's happening in other situations. And it does happen in other situations, but I think in some ways it's easy to kind of train yourself to not see it or not recognize it. And the biggest thing that these classes have done for me is just really just validating that way of experiencing as a way of learning.
Yeah, I agree with Casey's reflection. I think that this way of learning and observing the city is something that I will retain, and I think that will still be useful even in a more traditional kind of scholarly practice. It also demonstrated kind of a way in which you can do other kinds of research, historical research, scholarly academic research, and how you can connect that with your experiences of the city, your day-to-day experiences, and demonstrated to me ways in which you can, in which the places where those things meet, where those ways of thinking meet, and where sort of experience and this kind of observational learning can influence and inform other ways of thinking of producing and writing, which is kind of more what I'm invested in now. So yeah, I think that's definitely something that I will retain, and I will also retain this, that generally the idea that there can be other ways of engaging and ways of kind of narrowing practice with the ways of writing, that I think is really useful in the future.
I just have one thing to add. Yeah, Cecilia and Casey, based on what y'all were saying, it brought back a conversation I had with an art professor on, not talking about architecture, not talking about architecture education, but I remember changing my perspective a lot on art and stuff, and architecture, and my creative tendencies. But he brought the word up, like some artists consider themselves post studio, because thinking of them as sort of, they don't operate in the studio. Their practice sort of exists out in the world. And it's not until now, hearing Elle speak, that I've connected that to sort of this entire process being a sort of post-studio architecture education system, where we do have the studio. But I think of when I was working with Luke's a high school class Luke teaches in the summer, and we were just being introduced to some basics of drafting, and we were drafting on a beach in Rogers Park, rather than, you think of architecture students like always holding up in the studio, but this experience being post studio, I guess, really is what I think sort of lets it bleed into other aspects of your life, and your sort of past and future too, like Casey and Cecilia are saying.
Perhaps we should, first of all, thank you all three for that. That was all wonderful. Perhaps we should turn things over to questions. It looks like, Julia, you've had some things to say in the chat, but if there are any questions from any of you all in the remaining 10 or so minutes we have, I would be really interested, because I think, one thing that has been true about this is that we've been developing all this with a lot of connections in-house to other people, but it's also like there hasn't necessarily been a lot of, I don't know, I think to some extent it's kind of been built up inside out in a kind of, slow, gradual way, and not necessarily in a kind of big top-down, publicly obvious way. And so I'm very curious if there are other questions that any of y'all here have for any of us.
I guess I'm curious about hearing more about the open studios, just as someone, I think I kind of just missed that happening, but I think it's a really interesting idea in the sense that these classes are already kind of, in a way, kind of what Sam was saying, like they're post studio, and they're also at the same time kind of already creating this open environment of like collaboration and talking. So I'm wondering, how are those different, and how are they kind of like supporting the whole environment that you guys are cultivating?
Neil, do you want to speak to that maybe, and then I can add in if you want.
Sure. Yeah. Luke and I were originally thinking about the open studio. We were thinking of a way in which we could, within the culture of collaboration and sociability that we're trying to build into the whole design education, was a way of getting allowing students the kind of openness to do the most, even just the most mundane things, but even like think about big picture things as well, and be able to do it with their peers, so to kind of create a social space in which they could discuss maybe some problems they're having, ideas that they're having, troubleshoot, having technical maybe experts on hand to help students out with particular problems, but as well as just sort of socializing in general and talking about architecture because of common interests, having faculty there who could also participate in these discussions as well, and getting the students to think about the kinds of things that they really would like to learn about, any skills they'd like to think about, any people they'd like to talk to, and or themes they'd like to work on, and so that we could develop a kind of organic programming in which would respond to, very nimbly to the kinds of things that students are thinking about right now. To recreate that space so that everyone has a common space to come on a regular basis, where the space is for them, and where they can essentially bring to an architectural discussion anything that's on their mind.
Yeah, thanks, Neil. That's fantastic. And I mean, Casey, I would just add to that in the spring, when we had to do it outside because of COVID, it was really just a social gathering. It was really just a chance for people from these different classes to meet each other, because in a lot of cases they hadn't met outside of the group within a given class. I know that within these classes, the groups tend to get quite close, but across the classes or across the different cohorts of who might be taking class at a different moment, that isn't necessarily always true. And then also separately, just literally time and space to work, like time and space to actually do the work in the classes at a moment when maybe there's someone doing a project from another class next to you, and you can actually kind of witness that. Architecture schools are lucky. They have studio desks where everyone's kind of there a lot of the time, seeing what other people are doing. We don't have that spatially. And so that, kind of presents a need to try to build that up. Kelly asked a question in the chat that I'll answer briefly and then turn over to Newton. I think it depends a lot on the class. My approach with the readings of these classes is to try to make every reading something that students are actually going to enjoy reading as much as possible, and that they aren't too long, but they're things that are really trying to kind of fit in to whatever it is we're working on at that moment. And being willing to draw readings from not just kind of critical readings, things like, articles that might be from the Journal of Society of Architectural Historians, readings from books that might be in place in an architectural history class, readings that are, talking about direct experiences past of the city. There's a lot of really, really good reading out there about Chicago's architectural history, including Chicago's architectural history of vernacular architecture, even though those readings might be a little bit harder to find. There's good things by Daniel Bluestone. There's good things by Thomas Hubka about vernacular architecture. There's a lot of stuff once you kind of find those things that can be very compelling, combined with potentially some readings from architects or thinking about architectural theory to a certain extent, although many of my classes, I offer readings that are more tied toward direct experience of space or in the kind of history of imaginative experience of space rather than something that's too theoretical. And then I also offer often a lot of fiction and poetry, film clips, things that are related to the specific places, but also a kind of absorption into a world. And I often include some short creative writing assignments in the classes to help motivate this sort of importance of the absorption into a world of place, and place actually mattering on levels that are not reducible. I find that often is very important for the studio work. Also, last thing is just that the readings don't shy away from a kind of set of tensions. I mean, that history of this city in particular has plenty of tension in there and plenty of social history that is not always pretty. And that includes our own institution. We're at a very privileged institution that has a really complicated history. And so being willing to kind of interrogate those things too, I think is really important. And I'll pass over to Newton because I think that is especially important for your class, Architectural Memory.
Sure. Yes. Thank you. Yeah, actually, it's a perfect segue. Understanding what the South Side of Chicago has been, is still, as a, still a very segregated city, is definitely a central part of what we're looking at in studying social history of the South Side. That said, I mean, we start in readings, we start with really empathy in architecture. I've got a couple of readings by Paul Asma, including setting up for our next quarter some excerpts from his recent writing in regards to empathy. And then I have a lot in really regarding the history of the South Side and the Black cultural identity experience of specific people in specific places, and sort of how the place has tied to folks very specifically. it kind of runs the gamut, and kind of pulling up my last year's reading list now to kind of think through the reasons for all of it. You know, I'll also say that last year I did a complete overhaul of the course with respect to the pandemic. I could not possibly, you know, address the course in 2021 not without, you know, having a really laser focus on the Black experience during the pandemic in Chicago. So I was able to, you know, bring in a lot of current readings and, you know, sort of criticisms in some way, or I shouldn't say criticisms, but kind of examinations of the Trump era as well. So it kind of is all over the place, and it was, you know, certainly an intention for students to then kind of be able to formulate their own opinions of what's happening and reflect on that in the choice of their memorial topic.
I think just adding to what Nutan just said, this sort of currency of things, being willing to kind of look for things that are coming out right now as being potentially relevant readings. I know my students for today are reading, among other things, a short passage from the memoir, 3 Girls in Bronzeville, which literally came out this year. And so, you know, just being able to kind of draw on things that immediately fit in, including things like that, which is a memoir, you know, a piece of kind of somewhat creative nonfiction, to be able to sort of draw on and keep that directly current is really important too. Is there one last question potentially from anyone? I know we're getting close to the end. Well, if there's not one last question, since we are almost near 2 o'clock, I would just say, first of all, that those of you who are here, thank you so much for joining this panel. I'd love to know more about you as well. I know that wasn't really what this panel was, you know, sort of geared around in just 1 hour, but I would be happy if you all reach out. I put my email in the chat. And also if all of the rest of our panelists want to put your emails, if you're willing, in the chat so that anyone can reach out to you. And Jeannie, will there be a copy of the chat for us to look at later, or should we save it now on our computers?
Let's do. Sorry, a little tech problem.
Okay, I think I got that. All right, well, thank you all for spending this hour with us. I really appreciate it, and have a wonderful rest of your day, and hope to meet some of you soon.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Luke.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Luke.
Thanks, everyone. Good to see you all.
You too.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jeannie. That was great. Are you still there, Jeannie? Okay, bye, Jeannie.